Compliance, the final frontier. Tom Fox is the voyager of trekking through compliance. His mission? To explore the original series and seek out and share what it can teach you about compliance. Here's your host, Tom Fox.
Episode 19, Court Martial, Start Date 2947.3. In this episode of Trekking Through Compliance, we consider the episode Court Martial, which aired on February 2, 1967. The USS Enterprise has put in at Starbase 11 for repairs after an ion storm. During this storm, Commander Kirk was forced to eject a research pod containing Lieutenant Commander Benjamin Finney to prevent destruction of the Enterprise. Finney is presumed dead, although his body has never been found. Commander Stone, at the commander of Starbase 11, reviews the ship's records and discovers that Kirk has ejected the pod while the ship was at yellow alert and not at red alert, as Kirk had claimed. Stone accuses Kirk of perjury and warns him that he may be subject to a court-martial. Stone first privately interviews Kirk about his history with Finney. It is revealed that Kirk had served with Finney aboard the USS Republic and had reported a mistake Finney had made, causing Finney to be reprimanded and sent to the bottom of the promotion list. Ever since, Finney has blamed Kirk for hindering his advancement. Stone asks Kirk to voluntarily step down as the captain of the Enterprise, but Kirk disputes the allegations and demands a trial. At the trial, both Spock and McCoy speak on Kirk's behalf, while Kirk's daughter, Jamie, looks on as Samuel T. Cogley, Kirk's attorney, puts him on the stand, but again, Kirk's testimony contradicts the computer logs, which include a visual recording that shows Kirk ejecting the pod while the ship was on yellow alert. During a recess, Kirk comments that Spock may find a better chess opponent in his next captain, giving Spock an idea. Spock discovers that he's able to beat the Enterprise computer several times at three-dimensional chess, despite having given the computer all his knowledge of the game. He concludes that the computer has been tampered with as his best outcome should have been a draw. Spock arrives at this finding before the court-martial verdict can be handed down, and Cogley, following an impassioned speech on the right of man versus machine, demands that the court-martial reconvene aboard the Enterprise. Once there, Spock notes only 3 persons could have altered the computer records aboard the Enterprise: Kirk, himself, and Lieutenant Commander Finney. Cogley suggests that Finney is not dead. The remainder of the crew is beamed down to Starbase 11, and McCoy uses a sensitive auditory device tied to the ship's computer that can detect a human heartbeat aboard the ship and mask out all those known to remain on board. One heartbeat remains, coming from engineering. Kirk goes there to find Finney, who draws a phaser and gleefully informs him that he has sabotaged the ship so that it will drop out of orbit, killing everyone aboard. Kirk reveals that Finney's daughter Jamie is also aboard, confusing him and giving Kirk time to wrestle the weapon away. As Finney is secured, Kirk repairs the damage. Kirk is cleared of all charges and restored to duty. Fun fact, Kirk's attorney, Samuel T. Cogley, was played by Elijah Cook, one of the great character actors from the 50s and 60s. If you recall him from Shane, he was one of the homesteaders murdered by the bad guy, Jack Palance. So what are the 3 key takeaways from court-martial? First is, and we unfortunately learned this one in our last episode, which is your investigation protocol. How robust is your investigation protocol? Here we had visual evidence that Kirk had failed to go to red alert before he ejected the pod and allegedly killing Finney. However, it turned out that the evidence was not trustworthy, that the evidence had been manipulated. How do you make sure your evidence has not been manipulated in your investigation? If you talk to any person who regularly does internal investigations and then negotiates with the Department of Justice, the first thing they ask for is your evidence tied down? Is it prevented from being subject to manipulation? So tie down your documents, tie down your evidence. Second of all, never forget that at the end of the day, even if you self-disclose, there's going to be an adversarial nature to the proceedings. And this was driven home most strongly in this episode by the prosecutor for Starfleet, who was a former, and apparently she wanted to be a current and future love interest of Kirk. One would think that there was a clear conflict of interest, yet she said she was engaging in her profession and was being professional when she prosecuted a man she clearly had feelings for. As she had a drink with him before the court-martial began and really tried to express her feelings for him after the court-martial was concluded. So that's just an area that you obviously need to be aware of. And always remember that at the end of the day, although you may self-disclose, it is an adversarial proceeding. But within the context of that self-disclosure, you can present arguments to the Department of Justice for reduced penalties. Once again, it would be good if the evidence has not been manipulated. And number three is, how do you actually perform that investigation? I was greatly intrigued in rewatching this episode by the test at the end of the TV show, where they removed the heartbeats of the persons on board to finally make the determination that Finney had been, or rather was still on board the ship and had been since he was allegedly ejected with the pod. So the evidence clearly had been manipulated, but by using another form of evidence, Kirk was able to show that his version of events was correct and that he had not ejected the pod during the time when there was a yellow alert only. This is Tom Fox. I hope you will join us tomorrow for our next episode, where we take up the return of the Archons on Trekking Through Compliance.
If you enjoyed this episode of Trekking Through Compliance, you can help it grow by sharing it with the biggest Trek fan you know.